Man, I got some revelation and I think it is funny, man, Satan so. You went from walking on gold, now you going on your stomach, boy, you were so. The way you move is, the way you prove is, the way you do things, it is so stupid. Boy, you are worthless, you got no purpose.
The Army bought a plane like this one from the Wright brothers. And tested it and actually crashed.
What are they supposed to be doing?
The one they had that crashed and killed one of the pilots. But it was the very first example of the military buying an aircraft. Today we know aircraft have control surfaces, ailerons and elevators, but that wasn't true back in the Wright brothers' day. In fact, they had a clever way of allowing airplanes to be steered, and they called it wing warping. Now, I'm going to move this stick and watch what happens. On one side, the wing's going to go down. On the other side, the wing's going to go up. And the rudder in the back will also see it. See the wings moving?
Okay,
now that allows
wing
lift on one side to increase, and lift on the other side to decrease. You can do a coordinated turn. Now, if you want to control pitch, altitude, up and down, they use this forward canard wing. Okay.
My God.
That's how they control the airplane.
Wow. Look at where they're going.
Here on the tour for an hour.
Inland Indians for the Wright brothers.
The 29 was a very sophisticated bomber of World War II. By far the most advanced bomber. An ethical airplane called Boxcar took off and dropped the second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, Japan. And 6 days later, the Japanese surrendered. So, a very controversial mission, but these two planes obviously had a great deal to do with ending the war in the Pacific. The plane was named the Enola Gay. The pilot was a colonel at that time, Colonel Paul Tibbets. And why did he name the plane Enola Gay? That was his mother's name. This aircraft is another German aircraft, a monster. Now, look back at the tail. There's a propeller back there.
There's a little propeller.
That's crazy.
That's monster.
2 engines, a push and a pull.
Really? Oh, so it's like a four-wheel drive thing?
Well,
yeah, but
I
it's
get 4-wheel drive in the sky.
Yeah.
Well, why would you mount 2 engines on the fuselage? Well, if you mounted them on the wings, it creates a lot of drag. This plane is fast. This plane is the fastest propeller-driven airplane of World War II. Again, 470 miles an hour. And because the drag is greatly reduced by mounting the engines. This plane is a monster. It could have been a dive bomber. It has a cannon that fires right through the hub of the prop. It has a couple of cannons on the top.
I like those.
Very fast airplane. Only problem with this airplane is it never saw action.
No.
It came along very late in the war. The Germans built 60 of them, and this is the only one left. The rest were all destroyed on the ground, and they never saw action. Now, it had a lot of modern features. It had de-icers on the leading edge of the wing. It had what else? It had hydraulic controls. Most controls at that time were wired. Had hydraulic controls. Also had an ejection seat for the pilot. Now, if you're a pilot flying this airplane, you got to get out. Very concerned about that big tail and propeller at the rear. So, guess what? The tail and the propeller were mounted with explosive bolts. So if the pilot had to get out, he could jettison the tail and the propeller so he could get out safely.
Oh, okay.
So pretty marvelous airplane, but it was never used.
Did it actually really flew, or did it fly?
They flew it. They flew it. Did a lot of test flights, but it never got into company. And here's a picture of the airplane as it's ready to go back in the tunnel. See how the wings are folded flat against the flat against the body. Now the Japanese sailors could put this airplane together in 15 minutes and have it ready to fly. Well, this airplane was designed to do several things, but they were going to attack the Panama Canal. Probably could have done a lot of damage there, but the war was not going well for the Japanese, so they gave up on that goal, and their final mission was going to be to attack the Americans, who were getting ready for a land invasion of Japan. And they were doing, they knew where they were accumulating all their troops and supplies ready to get ready to invade Japan. So the Japanese took their 3 submarine aircraft carriers, each with 3 airplanes aboard, and they were going to attack the Allied forces there. And they got underway. I should mention they had disguised the airplane. They put the white star on the wing of the aircraft so it looked like an American fighter plane, so they could get right over the field before they were detected. And well, they started on their journey to the atoll, and 5 days before they got there, the war ended. And when the war ended, the admirals ordered the submariners to destroy the airplane, so they sent them all to the bottom of the ocean. And this is the very last one, which the Allied forces found in Japan in a factory after the war was over. We didn't know anything about this airplane until after the war was over.
And in the sky, the planes don't look that big.
It was really a beautiful airplane.
It's huge. First passenger plane to
The seats have a little more room than you find in airplanes today. Okay. Seats and made them into bunks.
Wow.
Pretty cool, huh?
Not
Not a bad way to fly. Yeah. Okay. Well, Boeing built 10 of these airplanes. They went into service in 1940, and World War II came along and they had to stop production. So they only got 10 of them built, and this is the last one left. It was sitting out in the desert in Arizona, rotting away, and 2 Boeing engineers came along and said, "Wow, let's fix this plane up and put it back into its original position." So they got the engines working and flew it back to Seattle. And the Boeing company spent 6 years restoring this airplane. They went out and found the original upholstery, all the original radios, all the original equipment that was on this airplane. It looked just like it did back in 1940. And they were showing it off around the country. Anybody ever been to the Oshkosh Air Show? Well, there's a nice air show every August in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. They took it there. They took it back to Seattle and were doing some tests. And the pilots apparently didn't realize that the fuel tanks, fuel gauges on this airplane are not real accurate. So they were flying the airplane and they ran out of fuel in the air and had to make an emergency landing in the lake in Seattle. And no one was hurt, but you can imagine what that did to the interior of the airplane that they had spent 6 years restoring. There it is in the drink. Yeah, right. No diving, right. And there's another picture. Well, the Boeing company hauled it out of the water and took it back and spent another year cleaning it up. And then in 2003, they flew it out here to the museum. Now, the same 2 pilots flew it out here to the museum, so apparently they learned a little bit more about fuel management on this aircraft. But that's state-of-the-art 1940. Now let's move back to 1954, and this was built as a prototype for a tanker, for
That was the fastest
a
plane.
refueling tanker.
Yeah.
Because the Air Force had jet bombers and jet fighters now that needed to be refueled in the air, and very difficult to do with a slow-moving, prop-driven tanker. So the Boeing company went out on their own dollar, built and designed this aircraft. And the Air Force was very impressed, and in 1954 it started flying, and the Air Force bought models of this as a tanker. They're still flying today, KC-135. 50 years later. Can you imagine? 50 years later, they're still flying the same airplane. Well, this airplane went on to become the prototype for the first Boeing jet passenger airplane, the 707. And that was the first American jet passenger aircraft, but it was not the world's first. You guys know who built the first jet passenger airplane? British, absolutely right. They had an airplane called the Comet. And what happened to the Comet? They lost a bunch of them they would disappear over the Atlantic Ocean. And they didn't know why. And turns out they were, eventually figured it out. The plane really wasn't strong enough to fly high and fast, and it had a weakness under one of the windows, a structural weakness. The window was failing and the plane was disintegrating. Well, by the time they figured this out, they had lost the market. They were out of business. And Boeing with the 707 and Douglas with the DC-8 had pretty much taken over the market for world passenger aircraft. And when we go look at the Concorde was a response to that. We'll go look at the Concorde. Flies faster than the speed of sound. Flies twice the speed of sound. 1,400 miles an hour. In this airplane, you can fly from London to New York City in 3.5 hours. Well, one of the main reasons this plane came into existence was the British and the French were both anxious to come up with something new so that they could recapture some of the world passenger aircraft market. And they both were separately designing a supersonic transport, but it became obvious it was going to cost so much to do this that they combined their efforts in 1958. And in February of 1967, the Concorde saw its first test flight. But again, it was not the first supersonic transport to fly. Who built the first one that flew?
Russia?
Very good. You know all the answers. The Russians. Tupolev Aircraft Company. They tested their supersonic transport in December of 1966. It had its first test flight. Well, guess what? The Russian airplane looked amazingly like a Concorde. In fact, the British and the French called it the Concordski. And the French eventually they stopped an official from the Russian airline Aeroflot, and they inspected his baggage, and they found a full set of plans for the Concorde inside. So, pretty obvious what had happened. Well, move forward now to 1975 and the Paris Air Show. Paris Air Show is a very famous air show. Every couple of years, all the new aviation stuff goes to that air show to show it off. And both the Concorde and the Russian SST were at that air show. And they had both flown the first day. And the Russians, after that first day, they decided they wanted to do something to the aircraft so it would outperform the Concorde on the next day. We don't know exactly what they did. We think they messed with the software. And on the next day, the Russian SST took off, went nose up, had a disastrous crash, killed the crew and a number of people on the ground. So that was pretty much the end of the Russian SST. But the British and the French built 12 Concordes for commercial use.